Baba Kama Daf Lamed Zayin Nu Mishnah Shor Shehu Mu'ad Lemino Ve'eno Mu'ad She'eno Mino Mu'ad Le'adam Ve'eno Mu'ad Libhema Mu'ad Liktanim Ve'eno Mu'ad Ligdolim Et Shehu Mu'ad Lo Mishalem Nezek Shalem Ve'et She'eno Mu'ad Lo Mishalem Chasi Nezek. We're going to learn a principle here that a Shor Mu'ad, it's not that it's either Tam for all things or Mu'ad for all things, but it can be Mu'ad for certain categories and Tam for other categories. So here's a few examples. If I have an ox and it's Mu'ad for its own species, that we saw it gored 3 other oxen, but it did not gore other species, right? It's around others, and a donkey, a horse thing, and it doesn't gore those, then it will be mu'ad for other oxen, so that if it goes and gores another ox, then I have to pay a full amount. But if it goes and gores a horse, I will have to pay only half. That's the first case. Second case is that it's mu'ad for human beings. My ox, it gored 3 human beings, but it never gored other animals. Well, in that case, it'll be mu'ad. If it gores another human being, I have to pay full amount. If it gores an animal, however, that's it's still tam regarding animals. Third case, if it gores small animals, young baby animals, but it never gored a large animal, then it'll be mu'ad for small animals. If in the future it gets a small animal, then that's its usual thing. It's already used to doing small ones, but it's still considered tam for big ones. So in all these 3 cases, that which it is mu'ad for, if it gores again, I'll have to pay a full amount. But if it gores a category that it was not mu'ad for, it remains tam, and I only have to pay half nezek. The Gemara is going to talk about this vav, right? Is it belong there or not? It's going to make a big difference. If you say, as it is here, that it's with a vav, then it's a description of the case. An ox that is mu'ad for its species, but it's not mu'ad, not for a non-species. That means it's been tested. It's been around horses and zebras and all that, and it never gored anything. So it's tested out regarding its own species, and it's mu'ad. It's around non-species, and it remains tam. So this is a description, and it's the meaning it's not mu'ad. That's its character. It's not goring those things. And then the conclusion here would be the law in it. If you take out the vav, then it would read as follows: a shor that is mu'ad for its species is not, and this eno is actually the legal ruling. If it's mu'ad only for its species, then we can assume it's still tam for other species, even if it was never around anything else but oxen, and so it's untested. We can assume that it's tam for everything. Okay, we'll see that difference in a minute. Just look at something else that will be relevant is the order of the things. If something, an ox is more likely, domesticated animals are more likely to gore their own species than another species. Its own species it will do for turf or for mating, it will gore a rival. That does happen, and even that is not usual, but that is more usual than it going and goring another species. Domesticated animals don't usually do that. And so therefore this makes sense that it would be mu'ad for its own species, and that still could be tam for not its species. So this goes from the more likely to the less likely. The second example, though, goes from less likely to more likely. It's even more unusual for a domesticated animal to go and gore a human. That's more unlikely than other species of animals. So this one goes from the order of less likely to more likely. And here, it's more likely for it to go for an animal to gore small animals that it can handle, and less likely that's going to gore large animals that are more difficult to fight. And so this one goes in the opposite order. So it's just interesting how it flip-flops, and it goes from the more likely to less likely, then less likely to more likely, and then more likely to less likely. This is going to be important in proving which way we go, with a vav or without a vav. All right, next, Amru lifnei Rabbi Yehuda, Harei ze mu'ad leshabbatot ve'eno mu'ad lechol, Amar lehem, leshabbatot meshalem nezek shalem, limot hachol meshalem hasi nezek. Over here, in these cases, was just different types of victims, human, animals, different species, and now we're talking about timing and different patterns of scheduling. So they asked the sages asked Rabbi Yehuda, let's say I have an animal that killed 3 times, but only on Shabbat. For some reason, on Shabbat, how does it know it's Shabbat is a good question. It could be that on Shabbat it's not working in the field, right? A Jew is not allowed to work his animals on Shabbat. And so during the week, it's working in the field and it's being controlled. On Shabbat, it goes around and let loose and boredom, right? Too much free time. And then it goes and lets it out and gores. So it could be that it does, in fact, have a certain pattern of behavior on Shabbat. Anyway, if it gores only on Shabbat, but it never gored anybody during the week. So what about that? And his answer was, yes, it will be mu'ad for Shabbatot, but not for Chol. So that if it goes and gores again on a 4th Shabbat, he'll have to pay a full amount. But if that same animal gores on Tuesday, you only have to pay half. And finally, ematai hutam mesherzor bo shelosha yemei Shabbatot. Now, in the case like that, how could it go from moed and revert back to being tam? It would have to go 3 weeks in a row, 3 Shabbatot in a row, in which it does not gore anybody. That's different than the usual. The usual case is a mu'ad is if it gored 3 days in a row, becomes mu'ad, and then if it doesn't gore 3 days in a row, then it can go back to tam. But this one's schedule is different. This is not daily, but rather from Shabbat to Shabbat. So the same way it became mu'ad, by only goring on 3 Shabbatot, then it can become tam by not goring on 3 consecutive Shabbatot. That's the Mishnah. Gemara. Itemar. Rav Zevid amar ve'eno mu'ad tenan. Rav Papa amar eno mu'ad tenan. There are 2 different versions, 2 readings of the Mishnah. I shouldn't say readings because the Mishnah was always was transmitted orally throughout the time of the Amoraim. So 2 different oral transmissions. Rav Zevid has a vav, and Rav Papa reads it without a vav in all those cases. So what difference does it make? Rav Zevid amar ve'eno mu'ad tenan hastama have mu'ad. If you have an ox that gores other oxen, and it doesn't gore, meaning and we know that it won't gore not other species, meaning it was around other species, and nevertheless it didn't gore them. So that would mean that only if it's tested and it's around other species and doesn't gore them, then it's tam. But sitama means it's not tested, right? It was never around those other species, and so we don't know what it would be. What can we assume? The assumption would be that it would be mu'ad. In other words, according to Rav Zevid, if it gores other oxen and it's around other animals and doesn't gore them, then it will be mu'ad for oxen and tam for other species. But if it's not around anybody and it gores 3 oxen, then we should assume that, and it's not around other species, then we have to assume that's mu'ad for all animals. So that's more machmir on the owner of the ox, that our assumption, unless proven otherwise, is that if it gores this type of animal, it will gore all types of animals as well. Rav Papa, however, amar, eno mu'ad tenan tistama la have mu'ad. He reads it without the vav, and that would mean if an ox gores 3 oxen, it is mu'ad for oxen, but this is a ruling about it, it is not mu'ad for other species. Meaning, even if it's not tested and is not around other species, we can assume that it's still tam. It's tam till proven mu'ad for each category. So even though it was never around anybody else, it gored 3 oxen. Okay, now you're mu'ad for oxen, but you remain tam for other species. Now, each of them are going to bring a proof. Rav Zevid diek mi sefa, Rav Papa diek mi resha. Rav Zevid is going to bring a proof from the 3rd case in the Mishnah, and Rav Papa from the 2nd case in the Mishnah, as follows. Rav Zevid diek mi sefa dekatani, mu'ad diktanim ve'eno mu'ad ligdonim. The 3rd case was if the ox gored only small animals, then it is still not yet mu'ad for large animals. Now, or meaning it is mu'ad for it gored 3 small animals, and it did not gore big animals when it was confronted with it, right? That means it's tested. Now, this makes sense. Iamat bishlama ve'eno mu'ad katane hasetame have mu'ad. Hakamash malan de'afilu miketanim ligedolim name misetama have mu'ad. So if you say it with a vav, that is what Rav Zavid says, then it would read smoothly, because it would mean as follows: if it's proven that it won't gore big animals, then it's tam for big animals. But if it's not proven, not tested, if it's stam, then it would be mu'ad for not only small but also big animals. Now this is an important chidush, right? It's kamash malan. It's teaching us that even from small to big, also stam becomes mu'ad. In other words, we have to add this case to the previous ones, because I might have thought otherwise. I might have thought, all right, just because it gored one type of animal, when it gores one type of animal and stam, and I don't know otherwise, well, I may have to, I would have to expand the categories to all other animals, right? Okay, that makes a certain amount of sense, that if it gored oxen, then it's going to be muad for everything stam, unless proven otherwise. But I would have thought that just because it's goring small animals, which is easy to do, but it's unlikely it would go do big animals. So I might think that in that case, stam you would not extend it, and it would be mu'ad just for small animals and not for big ones. So that's why the Mishnah has to add this line to teach me a chidush, that not only do you go from one species to another, but even from small to big. If it's stam, then you expand the mu'ad status. So Rav Zavid says this line makes perfect sense for me. Ela iyamart eno mu'ad katane setama lahave mu'ad. But if you say like Rav Papa does without the vav, eno mu'ad, then that would mean that if it gores one species, if it gores oxen, then stam, we can assume that it's tam, even without being tested. Now, and if that's the way we read it, and we read it also for all the cases, hashta yesh loma miketanim liketanim de'alma setama lahave mu'ad, miketanim ligdolim sericha lememar delahave mu'ad. If we already said that small animals to small animals, meaning like one ox, an oxen, to other species of small animals. When one assumes that it's one does not expand it and says if it's mu'ad only for oxen, then stam, we don't assume that it will be mu'ad for any other species of small animals. So if you already said that, then why in the world would you possibly think that being mu'ad for small animals would make you mu'ad for big animals, right? If being mu'ad for one type of small animal does not make you mu'ad automatically for other small animals, and certainly it shouldn't make you mu'ad for big ones. So this clause of the Mishnah would be obvious. You wouldn't even have to say it. So that's the challenge to Rav Papa. Now Rav Papa is going to defend himself. Rav Papa malach isterich. No, I still need the third one, even according to my reading. Why? Salka datecha mina ho'ilu faratz be bahu mina paratz be lashena gedolim dideh velashena ketanim dideh kamash malan de lahave mu'ad. No, I might think that you have to go into animal psychology here, that once an animal goes against the norm and breaches the normal behavior and gores a certain species, let's say its own species, then maybe I would think once it's goring other oxen, it's not going to distinguish between big ones of its own species and small ones of its own species. Once it does that, it does it, and therefore the Mishnah teaches me that, has to teach me that, just like you don't expand from one species to another, kamash malan delave mu'ad, so too it has to teach me that even within one species, you don't expand from small animals to big animals, right? Because it definitely is possible that an animal, once it starts goring small animals of other oxen, then it may go and gore a big oxen as well. but maybe, and even that one would still not gore other species. So these are really two different teachings, and both are necessary. So Rav Papa reconciles his opinion with that clause of the Mishnah. Good. Now we move to Rav Papa. Rav Papa diek meresha dekatani muad le'adam eno muad libhema. Rav Papa can prove his point from the Resha, which means the second case, that just because an ox gores 3 humans, we still do not assume, stam, that we don't expand that to animals also. And even if it's not around under other animals, just around humans, it remains tam. Now, iyamat bishlama eno muad tenan, setama la have muad, hakamash malan, dafilu me'adam libhema, nami setama la have muad. If you read it as Rav Papa does, without the vav and no muad, so that means that without stam, without being tested, it would not be muad, meaning it's only muad for humans. And then we assume, even with it not being around other animals, that it would not be muad for other animals. So this, according to the Papa, this would be important to teach us that not only in the first clause we learned that if it's muad for one species, it's not muad for other species. But I might still consider, I might not know that that's true if it gores a human, because it's less likely for an animal to gore a human. So I might think that once it becomes muad for humans, then all the more so it should be muad for animals, because it's more unlikely to gore humans than animals. So that's why it's a bigger chidush, right? Even if you tell me that if it gores one type of animal, it's still tam for another type of animal. Okay, I got that. But because it's less likely, if it gores only oxen, it's less likely that it gores other species. So then, yeah, that makes sense. It's mu'ad for oxen, but tam for other animals. But when it goes the other way around, as we said before, right, how it flip-flops, if it's, I might have thought that if it's mu'ad for humans, then all the more so it's mu'ad for animals, where it's less likely. And that's why the second line is a chidush, according to Rav Papa. Ela iyamat ve'eno mu'ad katane, ha-setama have mu'ad, but if you read it with a vav, as Rav Zevi does, and that would mean that that's only if it's untested and it gores humans, and it's tested regarding animals and it doesn't, then it's time for animals. But if it gores humans and it's untested regarding animals, then it would be mu'ad for both. Right, according to that reading, that you do expand the mu'ad from humans to animals, then why is this necessary, this clause? After the first clause of the Mishnah that said, if it gores oxen, then you assume also it's mu'ad for other species, right, which it is less likely to gore, then you don't need to tell me the second clause that if it's already mu'ad for humans, then stam, we would expand that also to other animals where it's more likely to gore. This would not be necessary. So that's Rav Papa's proof for his opinion. So we turn to Rav Zevid. What are you going to say about that? Rav Zevid says, oh, that line about the humans, that's not talking about how it becomes a mu'ad, but rather how it returns to being a tam. So here it's talking about the following example. You have an animal that is mu'ad both for humans and for animals. It gored 3 humans, it also gored 3 animals. And now the owner wants to try to get it back to being tam. And then it's around animals for 3 days in a row, and doesn't gore them, so now it should become tam for human beings. It's around human animals for 3 days and didn't do anything. So good. So that's good. Now it's tam for animals. Now what about for humans? Lav hazarahi. I might have thought that, wait a second, since it's still goring humans during that time period, since it didn't return to passive behavior regarding humans, so then maybe the going back to becoming tam for animals doesn't count, I might have thought. And that's why it teaches me that yes, it's possible for it to make teshuvah regarding animals, even though that's more usual behavior, and still it can be tam for animals, and go back to being tam for animals, even though for humans, which is more unusual behavior, it doesn't go back. Yes, you can split the difference between them. And so Rav Zavid says this is saying a chidush, because it wouldn't make sense really according to a kal vachomer. You would think that if it's tam for animals, which is more likely, then certainly should be tam for humans. And if the humans is remaining mu'ad, maybe I would have thought it can't go back to being tam for animals just yet. And so that's why I need that line. That's the chidush, because I'm interpreting it as going back to being tam. All right, so that's okay. Now we're going to challenge this explanation of Rav Zavid from a baraita. Metibe sumchus omer muad le'adam muad libhema mikal vachomer uma le'adam muad libhema lo kol sheken mikelal detana kama eno muad ka'amar. The baraita teaches that sumchus is arguing with the Tanakama, and he says that if an animal is mu'ad for humans, then all the more so it's mu'ad for animals, because it's less likely for an animal to gore humans than it is to gore animals, right? That's the kal vachomer. If for a human it's mu'ad and it's going to be so wild that it goes and gores humans, so for animals, all the more so. So that's only Sumchus's opinion. But we can infer that Tanakama would not agree with the application of this kal vachomer in the Mishnah. So now how does this relate to Rav Zavid and Rav Papa? As follows. In a case where an animal is found to be mu'ad for humans, Rav Zavid, who reads it with a vav, says that, okay, if it's mu'ad for humans, then stam, it's mu'ad also for animals. That uses the logic of this kal vachomer, that if something is mu'ad for humans, then all the more so it's mu'ad for animals as well. So you see that Rav Zavid, reading with a vav, would agree with Sumchus and his logic. But we know that Tanakama disagrees with that. And so Tanakama must be that he does not agree with Rav Zavid's reading, and so therefore Miklad Tanakama eno mu'ad kamar. Tanakama must not have a vav. See, if you don't have a vav, then you read it like Rav Papa does, and then the second line reads, if an animal becomes mu'ad for humans, then stam, it's still tam for animals. We do not assume that just because it's mu'ad for humans, then all the more so it's mu'ad for animals, right? Rav Papa does not say that. And therefore, Rav Papa, you see, does not agree with this kal vachomer, and that must be that Tanakama also, because Sumchus is arguing with Tanakama. Since Sumchus is arguing with Tanakama, Tanakama must be the interpretation of Rav Papa against Rav Zavid. So how's he going to answer this? Amar lach Rav Zavid. Sumchus achazara ka'eh. He says, Sumchus, he's actually talking about a case of reverting back to tam. V'hachi kamar le'tanakama. Dika chazara debema chazarahi. So he's saying as follows. Sumchus is saying to Tanakama, Tanakama, you said that when an animal can go back to being tam, but for animals, but still remain mu'ad for humans. That was Rav Zavid's interpretation just above of the second line, that an animal that doesn't gore 3 times in a row animals can then become tam for animals, but remain mu'ad for humans. So, Tanakama, that's what you said. Sumchus is talking. No, I disagree. Chazara b'ma lav chazarahi mekal vachomer me'adam mekal vachomer me'adam ma me'adam lo ka me'hadarbe me'behema lo kol sheken. I disagree, and I think that the animal returning from being tam to other animals is not a return because of a kal vachomer from the humans. If it regarding humans, it did not return back to its normal behavior, all the more so it will not have returned to its normal behavior regarding animals, where it's more common to gore. And so therefore, as long as it didn't make teshuvah regarding humans, it cannot become tam only for animals. That's what Simchos meant, and so this reading is consistent with that of Rav Zavid. Good. And now a proof for Rav Zavid from the continuation of the Mishnah, the Sefa. Amar Rav Ashet Hashema. Amru lifnei Rabbi Yehuda, Harei ze mu'ad leshabbatot, ve'eno mu'ad limot hachol. Amar lahen, leshabbatot meshalem nezek shalem, limot hachol meshalem hasi nezek. So here, the rabbis are asking Rabbi Yehuda a question. They don't know what the law is. And so they're asking, in a case where it became mu'ad for Shabbatot, but it was untested, and no mu'ad, or no, rather it was tested for the weekdays, and it was not mu'ad. So you see, and this is Rav Zavid's reading. In Rav Zavid's reading with the Vav, this ve'eno mu'ad is part of a description of the case, that it was tested and found to be mu'ad on Shabbatot, and it was also tested, meaning it was around animals, and was found to be tame during the weekdays. What is the law? And then he answers them, yes, that could be tam, it could be mu'ad for Shabbat and tam for Chol. So yamat bishlama ve'eno mu'ad katane shiula hu dekash le vehu nami kamehadar lehu. If you read it as Rav Zavid does, with a vav, which means that this phrase ve'eno mu'ad is part of the description of the case, then it makes sense that the sages are asking them a question, asking Rav Yehuda a question, and then he's answering it. Right? It's perfectly good. Ela iamat eno mu'ad katane. But if you read it like Papa, with the word eno mu'ad, well, in that case, eno mu'ad is actually part of is a ruling, right? Because then they're saying if it was mu'ad on Shabbat, then eno mu'ad limotachol, right? If it gored 3 animals on 3 Shabbatot, then a ruling is that it is not stam, it is not mu'ad for a chol. So then that's already the answer. So they already gave them the answer. So they already know the tradition. Then why are they asking Rabbi Yehuda a question? And if they already have a tradition that they're sending to the Rabbi Yehuda, then why would Rabbi Yehuda answer them and say, yes, indeed, this is the law? So this does not read well. According to Rav Papa, it must be that it's with a vav, and that's therefore it's part of a description of the case, and not eno mu'ad without a vav, in which case it is a ruling of the case. And the same thing in the next part. Amar Rav Yanai, or same thing in the Resha. Rav Yanai says, "Meresha name daika tekatane et shemuad lo meshalem nezek shalem ve'et sheno muad lo meshalem hasi nezek." In the Resha, it presented 3 cases, and then it gave a ruling about all of them by saying that which it was proven to be mu'ad, he has to pay a full amount. And that where it was proven not to be mu'ad, he pays chasi nezek. So iamat bishlama ve'eno mu'ad katane perushe kameferesh la. If you read it with a vav, so then that's part of a description. Then it makes sense that you have 3 cases, and after the 3 cases it says, oh, here's the ruling. Ela iamat no mu'ad katane pesaka. But if you read it without a vav, then eno mu'ad is already the ruling. So my tu et shemu'ad lo meshalem nezek shalem ve'et sheno mu'ad lo meshalem chasi nezek. Ad ashta lashminan da'ata meshalem chasi nezek mu'ad meshalem nezek shalem. So if you read it without a vav, then you already gave the ruling that if it becomes mu'ad for its own species, all right, then stam, it's not mu'ad for other species. So then I already know the ruling. So why do you have to have the entire sefa? I mean, after the 3 cases, you have a whole ruling. Why do you need that? Right? Didn't the Mishnah already tell you the law? So why does it need to repeat the law? So you see that the Mishnah really does not read smoothly at all. According to Rav Papa, and so it makes sense that it's with a vav, which is how we have it printed and this Mishnah as well. All right, that concludes that discussion. And now this is actually part of the next discussion, which is looking for other types of patterns. V'im timsvi timse loma nameita lidra papa nagach shor hamod v'gamal naaseh muad lakol. Even if you want to say that Papa's opinion that when it becomes muad for one species, then we assume it is not mu'ad for other species. Yeah, that's true. If it gored 3 times an ox, then it's mu'ad only for an ox and not for any other species. That's true. Even if you say that's true, nevertheless, if you have a following case, an ox gored an ox, then a donkey, and then a camel, then we consider it mu'ad for all species. Right, you see, this is a goring ox. It doesn't have to go and gore 3 oxen, 3 donkeys, 3 camels, and then it would only be mu'ad for oxen, donkeys, and camels, but maybe not yet for horses. No, if it gores 3 different types of animals successively, then it becomes mu'ad for all species, and even the Papa would agree with that. All right, now that we know that, let's look at the following interesting cases. Baraita, tenor banan. Ra shor nagach, shor lo nagach. Shor nagach, shor lo nagach. Shor nagach, shor lo nagach. Naaseh muad sedugin lishvarim. You have my ox. It saw one ox and it gored it. Then it saw the next ox and didn't gore it. The next one it did, the one after that it didn't, the one after that it did, the one after that it didn't. So you see, there's a pattern here that this ox gores every other. So then it becomes mu'ad for every other ox that it gores. So after that, after it says these 6 and it gored every other one, so then if it skips the next one and gores the one after that, like within the pattern, you'll have to pay a full amount. But if it gores one of the in-between ones that it should have skipped, and it doesn't do that and it gores it, then it's still a short tam, meaning it only becomes mu'ad for every, well, in this case, let's say it's the odd number ones, right? Because it gored 1, 3, and 5. Well, then it will be mu'ad for 7 and 9, but it will be tam for 6 and 8. Okay, so you can even, look at other types of patterns. Another braita, tenor banan. Ra shor nagach, hamor lo nagach, sus nagach, gamal lo nagach, pered nagach, arod lo nagach, naaseh mu'ad sedugin lakol. This braita, we're combining the laws that we learned in this braita and in the previous statement here. So in this case, it's doing in every other, but they're all different animals. So as an ox gores it, then a donkey but didn't, then a horse and it does gore it, then a camel that didn't gore it, then a mule and it gored it, and then a wild donkey and it didn't gore it. So you see, it's not distinguishing between one type of animal and another because they're all different species of animals. It is distinguishing, however, in the pattern of it gores the odd numbered encounters and not the even number encounters. In that case, it will be forewarned for all the odd number encounters, no matter what species it is. Okay, so that we know. Now we'll ask a few questions. Ibaya lehu nagach shor chamor vegamal mahu. My ox gores 3 oxen in a row, then a donkey, and then a camel. So how are we going to rule that? Hai shor batra shevarim shadenaneh. The third shor over here, do we group it together with the first 3? Ve'akat elishvarim hu de'iyad limidi acharin alad iyad. In that case, we would say, gored 3 oxen in a row. So it's mu'ad for oxen, but it's not mu'ad for other animals, as the Mishnah said. So do we say that? And we leave chamor and gamal separately. So then we just look at the 3 oxen, and the shor is used for the first 2, so it's already used up. So then you do not put together shor, chamor, and gamal. That's one way. Or mahai shor batra batan chamor vegamal shadinan le ve'ad le lechuluhu mineh. Or do we put a parentheses here? We put the break well, this already has a comma here, but let's say we put the comma over here. We say shor shor, that's a separate thing, and then we group together the shor with the hamor and the gamal, in which case everybody would agree it becomes mu'ad for all species. So do we group it that way? Good question, right? There's two equal ways to do it. All right, and now we don't answer it. We're not going to answer any of these questions. Next question. Hamor vegamal, shor, shor, shor. See, if you say maybe the first one, so you do whatever's first, right? Is that the ruling? So how about if you switch them around? And it goes a donkey, then a camel, and then 3 oxen, mahu. Hai shor kama, batar hamor vegamal shadinan le, ve'ed le chuluhu mine. Do we say that the shor goes together with the first one, right? Hamor, gamal, shor. So at that point, you could just stop there, and it's already mu'ad for all species, and therefore the short and short after is not going to help it. Or dilma batashivarim shadenane ve'akati l'shvarim hu diyaed leminachrina la iyaed. Or in this case, do we say, listen, if we stopped at after the first short, he would have been more for one for everything. But then after, since he went and got 2 more oxen, so the short goes together, right? You make a triplet, because they're similar to each other, and then you put the 3 shors together, in which case you're lenient, because then it's only mu'ad for shor, but not for all other species. We leave that open-ended. Next scenario, Shabbat, Shabbat, Shabbat. Echad b'Shabbat, v'sheni b'Shabbat. Mahu, it goes this week on Shabbat, the week after on Shabbat, and the week after that on Shabbat, and then on Sunday and Monday. How do we group that? Ha Shabbat batraita, bata Shabbat hu de shadinane, v'akete de Shabbat hu de aed limot achol la'iyaed. This third Shabbat, do we group that together with the first 2 Shabbatot, and then therefore became mu'ad only for future Shabbatot, but not for weekdays, because the weekdays it only gored twice on weekdays, right? Once on Sunday, once on Monday, and that doesn't make a pattern. That would be the lenient option. Or dilma batar echad b'Shabbat v'sheni b'Shabbat shadinan le ve'ed le lechule yoma. Or do we group the Shabbat together with the next ones, and we say, listen, it gored once on Saturday, then the next day on Sunday, and then the next day on Monday, 3 days in a row. That becomes mu'ad for all days of the week. We leave that open. Hamishi b'Shabbat ve'erev Shabbat v'Shabbat. Shabbat v'Shabbat mahu. Or now we flip around the order, and it goes on Thursday and then Friday and then Shabbat, and then the week after on Shabbat, and then the week after on Shabbat. What about that case? Ha Shabbat kamaita batar chamishi b'Shabbat ve'erev Shabbat shadinan le v'ya'ed l'chuluhu yomeh. This first Shabbat that it gored, do we group that together with Thursday and Friday? Then it's 3 days in a row, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it becomes mu'ad for all days of the week. Or dilma ha Shabbat kamaita bat ha Shabbatot hu de shadinan le ul Shabbatot hu de ayad. Or do we say that the first Shabbat is going to go together and make 3 of a kind, and therefore, since it's grouped together with each Shabbat, the Thursday and Friday are standalone. They don't create a pattern, and in that case, we could be lenient, and it's mu'ad only for the Shabbatot afterwards, but not for the weekdays afterwards. Teko, we leave all these questions standing. Now that we discussed a few simple patterns, how about a more complex pattern? Nagach shor yom hamisha asar b'chodesh zeh, v'yom shisha asar b'chodesh zeh, v'yom shiva asar b'chodesh zeh, pelukta de Rav Ushmuel. And that scored on the 15th of one month, and then on the 16th day of the next month, and then on the 17th day of the month after that. Does that set a pattern that after that becomes mu'ad for the 18th month after that, the 19th day of the month after that? It's always doing a month plus 1 day. And the answer to that will be a subject to machloka between Rav and Shemuel, who argued about the case regarding veset of a nida. The itamad ra'ata yom hamisha asa bechodesh zeh, v'yom shisha asa bechodesh zeh, v'yom shiva asa bechodesh zeh. Rav amar kav'a la veset, u'Shmuel amar ad she teshalesh bedilug. When we are trying to calculate when a woman will expect to be nida, on that day she's prohibited prohibited from being with her husband. And so the usual case is it's every a certain day every month. All right, or a certain number of days in between from one month to the other. But let's say you have a case where it's the 15th on this month, and then she starts sees Nida on the 16th of the next month, and then on the 17th of the next month. Then does that mean on the 18th of the month after that? That's going to be when she has to expect her next cycle. Rav says yes. All right, once you have 3, then the 4th one is going to be an expected day. Shmuel says no, not just yet. You need some space. You need that amount of space in between. In other words, 3 of them does not count because that's only 2 intervals. You need 3 intervals like that in order to create the pattern. Because the first one being on the 15th, that by itself, see if it was about if the pattern was every 15th, then everybody would agree that 3 months of that's on the 15th, that would establish the pattern. But here the pattern is not the start on the fact that the first one is the 15th, but rather the pattern that the next one is a month and a day, and the next one is another month. So you need to do that 3 times. In other words, 4 months in order to establish that pattern. So just like they have a machloket there, so too that we can apply the same machloket regarding an animal. Rav would say once you have this pattern 3 times, so then that's it. It creates a pattern for the next one. It becomes muad. However, Shemuel says no, just 3 cannot create a pattern because that's only 2 intervals, and 2 intervals is not sufficient to create a pattern by itself. Amar Rava, Shama kol shofar v'nagach, kol shofar v'nagach. Kol shofar v'nagach nasa mu'ad shofarot. An animal hears the sound of a shofar and it gores, and it does it again, and once again it hears a shofar and it gores. Then it becomes mu'ad for hearing shofarot. If after that it hears a shofar and it gores, the owner is liable full amount. On the other hand, if it gores without hearing a shofar, then the owner only pays half. But you ask, Peshita, isn't that obvious? This is like a Pavlovian ox, right? It's like trained to go and gore whenever it hears a shofar. So isn't this obvious that this would be a pattern? No, I might have thought that the first shofar, this just startled it. It's like heard this loud sound and says, oh, what's going on? And then it instinctively went and bit something. But it's not. That doesn't say anything about its character, about it being a dangerous animal. But therefore, this teaches us, yes, indeed, even though the shofar is a startling sound, we still consider that as part of a pattern of behavior. Next Mishnah. Shor shel Yisrael shel nagach shor shel hekdesh v'shel hekdesh shel nagach l'shor shel hejot patur. Shneimar shor re'ayehu v'lo shor shel hekdesh. If an individual's ox, right, a regular person, private property, goes and gores an ox that belongs to Hekdesh, right? Someone went and donated their ox to Hekdesh, belongs to the Bet HaMikdash, or the other way around. An ox that belongs to Bet HaMikdash goes and gores that of a layperson. Either way, the owner does not have to pay, not the layperson and not the temple treasury. Because the pasuk says, "Shor re'ayehu," if a man's ox hurts another man's ox, meaning another layperson, and that excludes hekdesh, whether the hekdesh is the victim or the perpetrator. Shor shel Yisrael shel nagach l'shor shel goy patur v'shel goy shenach l'shor shel Yisrael ben tam ben moad meshalem nezek shalem. A Jew's ox gores a non-Jew's ox. The Jew does not have to pay anything at all. Not tam, not muad, 0. Whereas the other way around, if a non-Jew's ox gores a Jew's ox, then no matter what, whether it's tam and muad, the non-Jew has to pay a full amount. Now this seems like a double standard, and the Talmud is going to note that in a different story regarding Roman officials that come. So what is the reason for this double standard? It seems unfair. One explanation is that this is in the context of depending on what is the non-Jewish law. So in the context of ancient paganism, where non-Jewish law said that if a person is not responsible for their property, a person is not responsible for their ox. So anybody's ox that gores anybody's ox, the owner doesn't have to pay. If you were living in such a context, then we're just doing the same thing as everybody else. If a Jew's ox gores that of a non-Jew, we shouldn't have to pay, because the non-Jews, when their oxen gore each other, they don't pay. So why should we pay when they wouldn't pay themselves? That's if you're in that kind of non-Jewish neighborhood. On the other hand, if a Jew is living under Jewish sovereignty, where the Jewish law is we are responsible for oxen and we pay each other, then we expect the non-Jew also to pay, even though it's actually even more, that they pay a full amount, whether it's tam and mu'ad, because in their law they don't distinguish between tam and mu'ad. So therefore, we would not apply that distinction to a non-Jew, which is still somewhat of a double standard, but it puts it into at least some context. Okay, matnitin de la Rabbi Shimon ben Benasya. The first half of the Mishnah is evidently not the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Benasya regarding Hekdesh. Tanya, shor shel hedjot shenagach shor shel Hekdesh, v'shel Hekdesh shenagach shor shel hedjot patur, shene'emar shor re'o v'lo shor shel Hekdesh. The Resha, Tanakama, is the exact same thing as the Mishnah, that if the ox of a layperson does the goring, or of Hekdesh does the goring, either way, the owner is not liable, because it says another person's ox, and not that of Hekdesh. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya omer, shor shel Hekdesh shenagach shor shel hedjot patur, v'shel hedjot shenagach shor shel Hekdesh ben tam ben mu'ad meshalem nezek shalem. Rabbi Shimon says there is a difference if it's a ox of Hekdesh that gores a layperson's, then patur. Hekdesh doesn't have to pay. But the other way around, a layperson's ox that gores one that Hekdesh has to pay a full amount, whether tam and muad. So it's 0 or 100 one way and then the other. So you see that our Mishnah is only like Tanakama, not like Rabbi Shimon. Amre, mai kasa ba Rabbi Shimon. The question is, how does Rabbi Shimon explain the pasuk? What is his derivation? Irehu davka afilu shel hedjot shenagar shel hekdesh lipatar, v'irehu lav davka afilu hekdesh nami ki nagar tehedjot lichayav. If he interprets the word re'ehu to mean precisely only if it's another person, well, in that case, even that of hedjot, that gored, even that of a layperson that gored an animal of Hekdesh should be patur, because re'ehu means only a layperson to another layperson, if you're interpreting it precisely. But if you're interpreting re'ehu to mean, like, for example, because usually it's two people, but it really wants to include all cases of any ox that gores any ox, in that case, even if the Hekdesh is the perpetrator, then the temple treasury should have to pay to the layperson who was the victim, and therefore it should be the same either way. So why would you make a difference? Either interpret it one way or another, but in what way can you explain the difference between the liability of a layperson and the non-liability of Hekdesh? V'chitema le'olam kasabarehu davka, umiu dehedjot ki nagach dehekdesh, hainu ta'ama d'michayeb, mishum dekam maitele mekal v'chom dehedjot. Uma hedjot shenagach shelodot chayav, ki nagach dehekdesh, lo kol sheken d'michayav. And so maybe you'll answer like this. The Re'ehu means davka, only two lay people to each other. That's what the pasuk is talking about. Nevertheless, when the layperson gores that of a hekdesh, then we add a liability, not from the pasuk itself, but rather from a kal vachomer built on the pasuk. That if the pasuk says that a layperson's ox that gores a layperson's ox is liable, all the more so if the victim is hekdesh, that would be even more liable. You gored something that's hekdesh, that should be more liable than a layperson. So really, the re'ehu is dafka, and that when the victim is hekdesh, we learn that from a kal vachomer. So that would seem to make sense. The problem is, dayola ba min hadin liot kanidon, ma'lelan tam chasinezek hachana mechasinezek. We have a rule regarding kal vachomer that you can't derive more than the source was. And so here, from the source, hedjot to hedjot, if it's a short tam, you only have to pay half. So therefore, if a layperson's ox gores that of hekdesh, it also should be that he pays half. But yet, Rabbi Menasya said he pays full amount, whether it's tam or mu'ad, he pays a full amount. So that could not be the result of a kal vachomer. Rather, a very ingenious derivation. Ela amara Resh Lakish, hakol hayu bichlal nezek shalem. Really, from the letter of the law, from the just basic morality, all cases one should pay a full amount. Like, okay, so what? Shor tam, shor mu'ad. Listen, your property caused damage. Really, you should pay for the whole thing. That would be the ideal law. However, the Torah comes and says, you know what? We're going to be lenient on a tam. Kishaparat lecha katub re'ehu gabe tam, re'ehu de tam meshalem chasi nezek, miklal de hekdesh ben tam ben mu'ad meshalem nezek shalem. So when the pasuk comes and says, listen, re'ehu, and that's said in the context of a short tam, so then the Torah says, even though from the letter of the law of natural law, from pure morality, everybody should pay a full amount. Listen, if it comes to your another layperson to layperson, and it's a short tam, so you weren't expecting this to happen, all right, we'll take it easy on the perpetrator, and you only have to pay half. But that leniency only applies to the Aihu. And when it comes to Hekdesh, then the original natural moral law remains the same, and one has to pay a full amount, whether it's Tam and Mu'ad. We had a proof to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh's reading of the pasuk by showing that if you read according to Tanakh Kama, then the pasukim would be more difficult, because if you say like Tanakh Kama that when someone gores, layperson gores out of Hekdesh, one is not liable at all because of the word Ra'ehu, well then the word Ra'ehu should have been written in the context of a shor mu'ad, not in the context of shor tam, right? Because it should be in a shor mu'ad and say payment even of shor mu'ad, which is more highly liable, applies only with ra'ehu and not with hekdesh. And then I would have known for sure if shor mu'ad is not liable when it gores hekdesh. I would know for sure that shor tam also is not liable when it gores a hekdesh. But the pasuk does not put the word ra'ehu in mu'ad. Rather, the word ra'ehu is in tam, which means it's making a limitation on the leniency of tam, that the leniency that one only has to pay a half, that only applies for a layperson to layperson. But if layperson's ox gores that of Hekdesh, then that leniency of half nezek does not apply, and that's why the Bishimon says a layperson that gores a Hekdesh animal has to pay a full amount, whether it's tam or mu'ad. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.